Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Brian's Horror Corner, and welcome to this Saw franchise movie review video as part of my current series where I'm taking a look at all the Saw movies in the franchise, all nine existing movies in preparation for Saw X, the 10th film, which is coming out September 29th, pretty much exactly a month from now, which I will have a spoiler-free review up for the first couple days after it comes out. Um, the first eight films I've watched and reviewed, they're up on my channel if you want to check those out. But today we're going to take a look at the ninth and final, at least up to this point, the final existing film, which is Spiral from the Book of Saw. So, yeah, this is the first and only movie that's not in the eight pack that I showed off for the first eight movies. But like most of the other eight movies, this was a first time watch for me for this series. So let's just go ahead and get into Spiral from the Book of Saw from 2021. Um, so Spiral from the Book of Saw is a 2021 American horror thriller film directed by Darren Lynn Bousman, who actually directed Saw 2, 3, and 4, I believe. And it's written by Josh Stolberg and Peter Goldfinger. It's a spin off. It is the ninth installment of the Saw film series. Follows police efforts to stop a jigsaw copycat killer. The original creators of the series, James Wan Lee Winnell, as well as Chris Rock and series veteran Kevin Grudert, serve as executive producers. So basically, the film opens during a 4th of July parade. Off duty detective Marv Boswick chases a thief down a sewer drain pipe. Attacked from behind by a figure wearing a pig mask, Boswick awakens to find himself suspended by his tongue in an active subway tunnel and is given a choice via recorded message: tear out his tongue and live, or remain until the next train arrives, killing him. Unable to escape the trap in time, Boswick is hit by the train and killed. The next day, police captain Angie Garza assigns detective Zeke Banks a new partner, idealistic rookie William Shank. Banks and Shank investigate Boswick's death, and Banks recognizes the elaborate trap as the modus operandi of the now deceased Jigsaw killer. Meanwhile, homicide detective Finch, who several years prior had ignored a backup call from Banks, resulting in Banks nearly getting killed, is abducted and placed in a trap where he must allow a device to rip his fingers off to avoid electrocution in a filling water basin. He is also he also fails to escape and dies. Some officers begin to suspect that Banks may be responsible due to his history with Fitch. A box then arrives at the station containing a pig puppet and a piece of Shank's tattooed skin inside. A small vial inside the box directs the police to a butcher shop, which was previously a hobby shop that Banks and his father, retired Chief Marcus Banks, used to visit. Upon arriving, the team discovers a tape recorder and a skinned corpse identified as Shank. So that's the setup and the premise for Spiral from the Book of Saw. As far as the cast, we have Chris Rock as Detective Zeke Banks, Max Minghella as Detective William Shank, Samuel L. Jackson as Marcus Banks, Marisol Nicholas as Captain Angie Garza, Daniel Petronijevic, Daniel Petronijevic as Detective Marv Boswick, and Richard Zapiri as Detective Fitch. So that's to set up the premise and the cast for Spiral from the Book of Saw from 2021. I have to say, of all the movies, this was definitely the biggest surprise in the franchise for me, in a good way. If you watch my reviews, you know I wasn't a huge fan of the last movie, Jigsaw, because I felt like they had 7 years and they basically repeated what they'd done in the previous seven movies. But this movie, they did kind of what I wanted, which was they still used the premise of Saw, but they involve sort of a different story than what we've seen before. It isn't the old cut and paste like we had the previous eight movies. So let's just go ahead and get into Spiral, what I liked and what I didn't like about it. So, starting with the pros for this movie, and I like the fact that they kept the essence of Saw with the traps and the game, and you just have a copycat Jigsaw killer. They didn't necessarily bring back Jigsaw and flashbacks and things like that we'd already seen in all the other films. So you still have the traps and the game and the gore. that a lot of people come to these movies for. But it also has a new and interesting story with good characters, and they just don't rehash things like the previous films do. I really appreciate that, and I give them props for that. I like that. I do think the characters are better in this movie. The story, it's definitely the most interesting story since the third Saw movie, I would say. Um, Kind of very much in the realm of sort of a crime um, cop procedural movie, and sort of having some crooked or dirty cops, if you will, sort of play into the whole theme here in this movie. And I really enjoyed it. I really liked the fact that they did that. I thought the movie had a really good balance of comedy, drama, and horror, to where there are some funny moments, especially in the first third of the movie, without there's some funny moments, but it doesn't become straight up comedy or a spoof. And it has some nice creepy moments in the second half of the movie. Overall, I just thought the balance was works really well in this movie and makes for an enjoyable watch. Which again is probably the first time I felt that way since Saw 2, Saw 3, sometime around there. Because the first few movies, you have a really good, interesting story involving detectives and police work and things like that, with Saw and with the traps and the game in the background. And then for like 5 movies in a row, it's all about the torture porn aspect of these movies. You know, the elaborate how elaborate they can make the traps, how much gore they can have, how over the top it can be, without a lot of story. And we finally kind of get back to what the first couple films were, in my opinion. So um, yeah, going into this movie knowing that Chris Rock was in it, I did have some hesitations about, oh God, I hope they don't turn this franchise into like a big joke now, or comedy, or some kind of spoof movie. I was thinking scary movie or something like that right away, but it isn't that. It isn't that at all. It really isn't. And while Chris Rock is Chris Rock in the first third of this movie, with some good one-liners and some good comedy thrown in there, it definitely turns into a more of a serious procedural police movie, with Saw in the background, with the traps and the game and the gore. So, very nice combination there that I really enjoyed. I thought they did a really good job with that. Um, I thought all the traps were actually good in this movie, more memorable and stood out more so than in the last few movies. They're not traps that we've seen before. And they also have the right amount of gore where it's not over the top like some of the previous movies, but it doesn't lack any gore either. I thought it was very effective all around. So the traps here, I wouldn't say they're the best of the series, but they're definitely not the worst of the series. I think they are a step up, probably the best since Saw 6, maybe even earlier than that. A lot of these movies kind of run together, so I kind of have to look through my notes to figure out what trap was in what movie. But I thought all the traps were pretty good in this movie. I wasn't impressed with them in Jigsaw, the previous movie, but I thought they were certainly better in this movie. And I would say the traps were this is a top 3 or 4 movie in the franchise in terms of traps, in my opinion, and in terms of gore. Not that it's the most goriest movie in the franchise, but it's more realistic gore, very real like. Like for example, there's a tongue at the beginning of this movie that we end up seeing, aside from the person that it belonged to, and it looks like a real tongue. I mean, it isn't CGI, it isn't fake or anything like that. So I really appreciated that, and I thought they did a really good job with that. The movie's really well paced and never feels slow or boring. I think it moves along at just the right clip to tell this story and to enjoy the movie with the traps and stuff without having to overthink like some of the previous movies like Jigsaw and the final chapter and other things like that. So this was kind of the best of all worlds in terms of the pacing, making the story work, but still having just the right amount of traps at the right amount, given at the right time in the movie. It was really well done overall. Um, I think the production value, once again, just like Jigsaw, is definitely a step up from the first. You know, the reason they could make the first 7 movies every year after another is because the budgets were very low. Well, Jigsaw came along, and that was the one thing I did like about Jigsaw is the production value was a lot higher, and they got rid of some of the shaky editing. In this movie, they have a little bit of the shaky editing back, but the production values, once again, it's very good, especially in terms of how the film is shot, the cinematography, the camera work, good sets, and great lighting and color palettes that they use. not very, not in the tradition of Saw necessarily. They throw some different color palettes and um, some different lighting choices into this movie, so it's got its own kind of its own uniqueness to it. But like I said before, it's all set in the background of a Saw movie. So that was really well done from a production standpoint. I definitely think this is one of the better acted Saw movies, especially having Samuel L. Jackson in the movie, and yes, even Chris Rock, who I know a lot of people have a problem with him in this movie. I actually thought he was pretty good, to be honest with you. Like I said before, in the first third to half of the movie, he's doing Chris Rock kind of things, the one-liners and the comedy injection, and but I thought that stuff worked. I didn't feel like any of the comedy was embarrassing or bad. I thought it was. I especially like how they open the movie when they're talking about. I won't give it away, but they're making reference to Forrest Gump, the movie, and you'll have to see it. It's really at the beginning of the movie. I really enjoyed that. He's talking about it, but there's some other humor that he injects, just what you would expect from Chris Rock. But then again, as I said, it doesn't turn into a spoof or a comedy. It's definitely not a comedy. It really gets into drama, as well as the horror of the Saw franchise. And so just that balance. But I thought Chris Rock was good. I'm not going to say he deserved an Oscar or anything for it. There's some rough dialogue throughout the movie that he gives that doesn't work all that well, and some of his facial expressions are a little over the top. But for the most part, for a Saw movie, given the acting in some of the other movies, I'm not really gonna complain about Chris Rock in this movie. And I thought the supporting actors and actresses were good in this movie as well. Part of that increase in production value, I think. So I really enjoyed those aspects of it. Um, I like the fact that it kept the whole moral question of the traps in the game. There's some movies where it kind of lost that, where they would throw somebody in this game in these traps because they broke down a door too quickly. Not to keep picking on that movie, but it is the most ridiculous. And I felt like the motivation here made a lot of sense. It was logical. It made uh, um, thematic sense. Probably for the first time since the second or third Saw movie. Once again, um, I really felt like it had that moral question involved, where the people put in the Saw traps really did have to decide, and they really did have a chance to escape. Where some of the movies in the middle of this franchise, it's kind of an unwinnable situation and kind of lost what Saw was founded on at the beginning. So, yeah, those are my pros for Spiral. In case you can't tell, I kind of like the movie. Getting into some cons, I really only have two, maybe two and a half. Um, the final twist or reveal of who was doing all of this and wasn't all that surprising. Once again, I'm not going to say that it was the worst of the franchise. It's probably somewhere in the middle of the road in terms of how they pulled off this revelation, this big reveal, this big twist. But there's certain lines and editing choices that they make throughout the movie that kind of make it pretty obvious if you really watch the movie. At least it was to me. So that was kind of disappointing because really the first three movies are the only ones that have those good, like all time great Saw kind of ending twists to them. And then they try in other movies to varying degrees of success or lack of success. But so that was one thing it wasn't all that big of a surprise or a big that big of a twist reveal in this movie. I also felt like they brought back the flashback sequences and the shaky editing, though I didn't think it was as bad as some of the earlier movies. It did feel a little repetitive in the third act, especially as they go back to the same scene several times and then kind of give you a little bit more this time, give you a little bit more. That I thought was kind of unnecessary and just felt very repetitive. You got to give the audiences more credit than that, I think, in terms of them being able to figure things out. And then my sort of half con that I mentioned is I would have liked Samuel L. Jackson in the movie more. He's very much a side character here, but as someone who's a big fan of Samuel L. Jackson, he gets a few great lines in here, though a few classic Samuel L. Jackson lines with some f bombs dropped, and so I really enjoyed him in this movie. But I would have liked him even more in this movie. But like I said, that's a pretty nitpick kind of con. But overall, guys, I actually think this is one of the better Saw movies. I know for the ninth movie in a franchise, that's probably hard to imagine. But it's kind of the opposite of my reaction to Jigsaw, the previous movie that I reviewed. This kind of did have new stuff going on. They did kind of go away from the old, tried and true, like they were doing for seven movies before. And I enjoyed Spider. I'm going to give this movie a 7.5 out of 10. It's not an Oscar-worthy movie. We have seen dirty cop police procedural movies before, but I thought adding a Saw movie in the background and not making the traps in the game the sole purpose of the movie as a torture porn movie, but going back to the roots of this franchise where you have this story with these detectives in this precinct, these cops, and then having the game around that in the background, I thought was really a true a return to form, if you will. So 7.5 out of 10 for Spiral from the Book of Saw from 2021. Go ahead and comment down below what you guys think of Spiral. I'd really be curious to hear. I know it's kind of a polarizing movie. There's a lot of people that like it. There's a lot of people that don't like it. It doesn't feel like Saw to them. But comment down below what you think, why or why not you like it or don't. Please like this video and hit the little notification bell so you don't miss any of my upcoming, well, ranking now for this series. I got one video left. That's going to be my franchise wrap up and ranking video for all 9 of these existing movies. Please be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my great horror content, not just the rest of this series, which is one video left in a few days here, but also what I have coming up the rest of the year and beyond. So I hope you're enjoying this series, this franchise review. I hope you enjoyed this specific review, and I hope everybody's doing well. But of course, stay scared. Bye.